Hey everybody, I think we're going to get started in here. I think people can just trickle in as they want. I'm sorry if I'm squinting a little. Can we, the lights, just because I'd like to see the audience, can we dim them just a tiny bit? Thank you, that's perfect. Nice. Whatever you just did, fantastic. So we're talking about the urban-rural divide, which is queer art as a guide for bridging the gap. My name is Cariel Klein.
And my name is Bennett.
Yeah. We can go to the next slide, I think. We'll start. So there's bios up here, which you are welcome to read. I'm just going to say my pronouns are they and she. I am the producing director at Double Edge Theater. I've been with Double Edge since I was a child. My mother founded the theater, but I left and had a whole other career doing circus and then tech for a long time before I realized that I really wanted to be with a community where I could actually make change in the community that I was working in. And I think, because I was living in New York for 10 years, I was like, I'm actually not impacting this as much as I want to see. And I realized really that I was called back to being in a rural space. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello, my name is Bennett. I use they, them pronouns. I am the Associate Director of Queer Public Programming at the Theater Offensive based in Boston. And I came to TTO because someone, a dear friend to me worked at TTO and said, you have to be here. And I wheedled my way by way of directing for our True Colors troupe, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a bit. And then came on in 2021, at the end of 2021, 2022, as the programs manager. And the first thing that I did was get swept away to a road trip to Double Edge. And at that time, I didn't know that Double Edge was going to be such a huge part of the reason why I make art now and the work that I get to do at TTO, but I'm really grateful that my start and my continuation is so much hinged on this partnership.
That's nice. I want to say also, we're both friends, and I also want to say just some things that we're both queer. We both identify as queer. And really importantly, we're both under 35, which I think for panelists, yeah, but like for panelists in places like this, it's really important to have youth representation, especially youth representation in leadership. I think it was really beautiful listening to what we were hearing earlier, which is talking about that we're in kind of a shitty place right now in this country. It's not the greatest. The generation, my generation and generations after me, are really looking at what the world is in a way of like, what do we do right now? And when we have voices like mine and Des, it's really important that we're speaking into this room and into spaces like these. And it's not just looking up to people who are speaking for us, which is really, in this particular moment, really important. And that is for our age, for our identities as queer people, for who we both embody in spaces.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll say, as a Black trans person who kind of went through, reached leadership at an age that I maybe didn't expect, I think we offer a really interesting perspective and a really vital perspective to what it means to build sustainable art infrastructure right now and sustainable ecosystems of artists. So really grateful to MCC for having us here.
I think we can go to the next slide. You want to talk about Theater Offensive?
I love talking about the Theater Offensive. The Theater Offensive was founded in 1989 from the United Fruit Company, and which was a guerrilla street theater troupe specifically aimed towards raising awareness on HIV/AIDS at the time. And this was an organization at its beginning that was very cis, white, and gay-led. That was the focus at the time, and that was the community at the time. And in 2019, TTO shifted its mission specifically to be by, for, and about queer and trans people of color that transcends artistic boundaries, celebrates cultural abundance, and dismantles oppression. Some of our flagship programs are the True Colors program, which was started in 1994 and is the longest running queer youth theater troupe in the country. And we not only do we support youth, but the program that I run, which is Queer Republic, also supports emergent and established artists, but also elders. So our programming really stretches from youth to seniors in a way that is very intergenerational, and also allows us to be in deep community with our artists from the beginning of their careers, before they even know what they're going to do next, through their aging years, in which community often, especially queer community, starts to become a little bit disconnected. So we kind of bring them back into community via our adult programming.
Yeah, I mean, you also do a lot more than that.
We do a lot more than that.
Do you have a highlight of things that have recently happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Outside of our residencies, which is what I'm primarily going to talk about today, we also have partnerships with the Coolidge Corner to present queer and Black and brown communities with film. We do those about once a quarter-ish. So we just had one, and we're able to bring the director and producer in for a conversation as well. We do a lot of advocacy around QT BIPOC and queer arts, but also housing and legislation and things that really impact our community. So we're constantly advocating in that way. And we also have programs that specifically work towards highlighting trans folks for Trans Day of Visibility, Trans Day of Remembrance. These programs, which kind of fall under our Radical Futures programming, really stem from the idea that we want to provide resources through an arts and culture lens that help our community build resilience. And resilience looks like joy. Resilience looks like workshops that help us learn about herbalism, or taking a boxing class, or learning how to make zines, all kinds of things that help us build resilience in our community, continue to advocate, continue to protect and support ourselves, and so much more as well.
Many things. The next slide would be great. So Double Edge, Double Edge has been around for, we'll be 45 next year. We are what I would say is one of the oldest, if not the oldest of its type place in the US, which is that we are a 105-acre converted dairy farm, which now has also, I believe, 5 satellite sites, not just the 105-acre dairy farm. We moved from Boston, where we were founded in 1982 in Boston. We moved in the early 90s out to rural Massachusetts with the idea of, we need a place to make work, and then we'll bring the work back to Boston, which is kind of a colonizer mindset. I really do want to mention that. I think we really quickly learned 2 things. One is, community won't welcome you if you're not actually here to be with the community. And 2, the second thing is, you got to commit to place. And we really quickly learned that Ashfield is a place worth committing. It's a town in western Massachusetts, so the second poorest county in Massachusetts, Franklin County, right at the foothill of the Berkshires. Money flows to the Berkshires, a lot doesn't really come to Franklin County. This is an old dairy farming community. It is the traditional homeland of the Nipmuc, the Pocumtuck, and the Abenaki Confederacy. It is also a town that was founded formerly as Huntstown by 2 formerly enslaved people. I mention this because I talk about the really radical history, and now when we landed in Ashfield, it was not that place anymore. Ashfield was like dairy farming, all these dairy farmings dilapidated because pretty much all dairy went to big farming communities. These were mostly white people who were really not sure what to think of this community of people who are doing theater, running around, doing very vocal training in the middle of their fields. Now, this day, we're the town's largest employer year-round. We have programs where we do housing, we do residency, we do partnership work, very deep partnership work, both locally and with other organizations that we have really deep relationship with. We do environmental work, we work on food sustainability, so we garden our own food. We do a lot the idea is that if artists have ownership over the means of which they can survive, that changes the nature of the art, and it changes the nature of being with the town. So if, for instance, we can supplement people's lives with cooking for them, how does that change their ability to make art? And that's a really important idea for us at Double Edge. We are ensemble, we are and are sort of driven by an ensemble mission, which is a core of 9 of us. However, there's like 25 of us who live and work year-round at the theater, not including the many volunteers or collaborators who are coming. Right now we're in the midst of our summer show, so we're working with, I would say, 60 people a day, bare minimum, who will help us with our summer shows. I want to talk for a second about the historic nature of Double Edge and TTO, which is that Double Edge was the host of the Theater Offense's very first performance in the late 80s, which was held in Double Edge's, the church that Double Edge worked in Alston. TTO was doing a performance, I believe, in the basement as part of the Women's Theater Festival in Boston, the first Women's Theater Festival, or one of the first. That relationship of like Double Edge, which is doing sort of radical ensemble work, people are creating performances with no words and just movement. I should also mention that Double Edge was founded because the idea was that when it was being founded in the late 80s was that there wasn't a place for women to make work. So it was really founded as a feminist women's theater company. And the idea was that work had to be accompanied by work that was being done at the time by the Theater Offensive. That sort of ethos has continued to this day. So in 2019, I met Harold Stewart, who was then incoming as the head of TTO at Alternate Routes in North Carolina. And Harold was like, I'm really interested in Double Edge. And I was like, I don't know who you are, but cool, come. Didn't really know him at all. And then Harold came to the theater to watch Suga, a performance of one of our co-artistic director, Travis Coe, about the sort of concurrence of his identity as being young, black, queer, and from a pretty religious family. Harold came and watched that show, and if you know Harold is one of the most studied people I've ever met, and had a lot of actually really intense rhetoric around it, which was really helpful to hear. And then Harold's like, I want to come do a residency. So a few months later, he comes and does a residency by himself in the middle, I think it was at Christmas time. He just came and wrote in a room for a week, which was totally fine by us. We were like, cool, that sounds great. A few months later, he comes and brings a group to start working on a performance then called Fly. And at that point, we started realizing that there was something there, that we should be working with Harold, we should revive this partnership. We were like, we're a rural space. You live, and you're now working at TTO, which is urban, very different but similar mission-minded communities. We should think about how to partner. There's something here that is really cool, and the same reasons that we left Boston in the early 80s is the reason that we can help you right now, which is that we have space, we have the ability to do things in a way that you can't do on your own. So I think we can go to the next slide, which if I'm in the right order is correct. So yeah, do you want to talk about this?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just so you're not craning your head. So in 2020, the Theater Offensive and Double Edge Theater embarked into a Harvest Partnership. And we define Harvest Partnership as a commitment to mutual collaboration through program development, organizational learning, and resource sharing to water and harvest both organizations' crops, which for us is life-sustaining, liberating art. It's really a dedication to fostering both of our missions together through our programming, but also we do so much together that supports the learning and kind of osmosis of what we're learning in our urban communities and also what you're learning in your rural communities and how that really supports artists across the sector. Did you want to say more about that? I kind of cut you off a little bit. Did you want to say more about that?
No, I think we can keep going.
Okay, great. So we believe that this partnership is really enigmatic and can be served as a blueprint for how other communities can work together. There are lots of other examples of like a rural community and an urban community, or a fishing community and an urban community kind of working together, but this is very specific to Boston and Massachusetts in a way that I think is very beautiful. And while we're going to talk a little bit about the residency at the forefront, because that's really what this partnership has transformed into, we also kind of think about how to work together organizationally as well. So that also means, how are we using our resources as an urban organization to support what you all do very, very intentionally, which is supporting infrastructure of the city, supporting artists in a way that is not just giving them money to do a project, but also giving them money to live, giving them food. And so we've learned a lot when it comes to supporting artists holistically, and making sure that they're fed, making sure that they're housed, making sure that they have transportation to get to us. And one thing that I think is important to mention is that you were talking about hyperlocality. And while TTO is Boston-based, not all of our artists are from Boston, but in order to really foster what is investment in a rich Boston-based cultural ecosystem, this partnership allows us to have artists come with us for at least 2 years, if not more, if they continue in the residency in some other manner, and participate in a real deep relationship with not only Boston, but also Ashfield when it comes to supporting workshops, when it comes to really just getting to know your community and also the land that you're on. And I think for a lot of urban artists, that isn't something that we're able to, we have the privilege of doing. I think one of the most and easiest radical things that we can talk about when it comes to this partnership is that we bring about 30 QT BIPOC people to the woods for a week every 6 months. And that is pretty unheard of, especially when it comes to a arts organization. Yeah,
can I add a little bit? I just want to give a little bit of context, and we're going to talk about the specifics of this residency, but I think that a really important thing to note is you have two really incredible organizations doing what they're good at together, which means that you have a sort of rounding of what you can offer, but also a rounding of what capacity is. It's tricky, I want to say, Harvest Partnership is tricky, because each organization is its own ecosystem, its own sort of way of working ways. TTO likes email. I hate email. I would rather use Slack. Trying to get us in different places is a learning curve. But over the course of now the 6 years that we've been working together, the idea of that it would be really impossible for us to break apart to do this, because we are symbiotic in the relationship of how we work together. TTO has, I would say, some of the best administrative capacity and care that I've ever seen in an organization, especially in terms of what they're doing for artists. The idea is really radical. The idea that, it shouldn't be radical, but it is. And there's a lot of learning, I think, that big institutions don't want to give to smaller institutions. That is why it's important we have this sharing. So you have TTO really holding people administratively in a way that Double Edge doesn't have capacity to. Double Edge doesn't have the capacity to fine-tune contracts in the way that TTO really knows how to do. But Double Edge has a lot of experience holding artists from nascency through to production. So much so that we're used to people being I want to put something in the sky and make an aerial rig. We've done that. I want to be on a boat in the middle of the water. We've also done that. We have a lot of experience with people playing in space in ways that are not really allowed outside of what I would, in traditional space. And because we can both sit together in the room and be let's do this together, that for me is the strength of our partnership.
Absolutely. It just expands the imagination that we're allowed to have and the actual reality that we're allowed to create with these artists. I think oftentimes I come to you and I say, this is a crazy ask. Can we do this? And you're like, that's not even the craziest thing you could ask me.
I also want to say, just very briefly, there are no external partners to this partnership. It is Double Edge and the Theater Offensive, both funding and supporting this work, which is, as you all know, tricky. But it also means that we don't have to do things like tell the artist they have to provide us something. Like they are only working with us and with TTO. So when we have conflict or we have things to work through, we're not bringing in somebody from the outside being like, you also have to now suddenly be part of a mediation process or whatever. It's really small and circular, which is really important.
Yeah, I think some of our biggest learnings have been through conflict or hiccups that we are not letting fester. I think that's one thing that's like really important to this relationship and also to our relationship as co-directors of this is we don't let problems fester until, until next residency, because we know also that these things become patterns really easily, especially for our organization. I think for most organizations, like these are decolonization processes or reimaginations of the way that we are going to be administering these programs. And so it's easy to fall back on what we know. And so much of this partnership is breaking down what we know and building something new. And that really requires direct communication and problem solving where you're not scared to bring up, oops, ouches, or this process didn't go well. So we're constantly in conversation and debriefing of how our programs are going and what we can do to make them better.
Yeah. Do we want to talk, maybe get into some nuts and bolts about the residency?
Yeah, absolutely. We can go to the next slide real quick, which is just a collection of some of the most beautiful people I know and the work that we do together. You'll see TTO's community here for orientation for our most recent and ongoing residency back in October. Artists from our previous residency, such as River Gidry, and some photos from the share-out that we've had as part of our most recent April residency. And we can go to the next slide and kind of get into the nuts and bolts. So the residency itself, it's the Emergent Artist Residency, and there's 2 tracks which I'll talk about a little bit, but it was piloted in July 2021 and is dedicated solely to queer and trans artists of color to develop in-process or new works of multidisciplinary art. So we're not just creating theater, but we're also looking broadly towards performance art, specifically at the intersections of different mediums. So you want to create a drag theater piece, we can help make you do that. You want to explore projections or animation, we can do that. You want to make a who knows how long experimental opera, we can do that. Last year we did an aerial dance piece that was probably the most ambitious thing that TTO has ever taken on and the most out of our wheelhouse, but it was a huge learning experience for everyone involved. And so we're really dedicated, specifically this residency, to incubating the artists for about 2 years, 22 months. This has grown since the first residency, which I believe was 18 months. And I came in kind of at like the 16th month mark and said this has to be longer to really get to the place that we want to be when it comes to releasing these artists back into the world. But this residency really came out of the scarcity that we're talking about for QT BIPOC artists to create art that is sustainable for them and also for their communities, and is really a manifestation of abundance. We don't just look for abundance, we have to create it sometimes. And really this was a imaginative collaboration between myself and our previous program director, Tanisha Jones, who said, wow, I really wish I had this. How can we make something where QT BIPOC emergent artists can really land and get their footing and have the stepping stone to the rest of their career? So we have 2 tracks. The first, well, 3 technically, but the first is the True Colors residency, which is born out of our True Colors program, and really that program seeded this residency overall because from that program grew our first festival, which was the Out Hood Festival in 2017, and we kind of took the structure of that and re-envisioned it for our Queer Public residency. But the True Color residency is founded on the idea that we can create new pedagogy and new ways of making performance art that draws from QT BIPOC liberative aesthetics, that draws from Black and Indigenous ways of knowing and making, and really helps us set set a new groundwork for how to enter into different types of pedagogies. So examples of that are Theater of Union, which was our previous True Colors residency and was a theology of how can we use theater as a way to bring people together to solve problems and to make societal change. Our current True Colors artist is Desiree Graham, and she is working on a pedagogy around vocal performance and vocal training that destabilizes the idea that the kind of like white normative ways of accessing the voice through the body, and really draws on ancestral work in terms of how can we use songs that your family has sung or songs from your lineage in order to access a broader range of vocal capacity. So that's the True Colors residency, and then the Queer Public residency is specifically for new works. Sometimes the True Colors residency does develop into new works, as in, here's the practice, let's put it into practice, and maybe there's a showing. But the Queer Public residency is specifically geared towards supporting artists who have a new idea for a new work, and either through level 1, allowing them to create a workshop performance or in-progress performance of that work, or level 2, which usually gets you to a full production and is often much larger scale. So these artists are all kind of in different tiers and different tracks that are also able to create kind of a symbiosis as well, where they're able to learn from each other, learn in cohort, and really gain skills as a group, and have built-in mentorship from, for example, the level 1 artist to the level 2 artists, the True Colors artists to the rest of the artists. A big thing about our current residency is that they're all working with music in some way, and so they're able to kind of share skills around that. The vocal artist who's going to be doing workshops is going to be doing workshops with the other artist cohorts. So those are kind of the ways that things come full circle. I want to talk a little bit about what we offer for the residency. If we can go to the next slide. So I just talked to you a little bit about the tracks, but they're also very artist-led. We're not necessarily dictating a particular outcome, and we're really open to things having to change throughout the residency. At the beginning, and this is actually a new process for us, we sit down with the artists and we really map out what does the next 2 years of this work look like for you. And we make a plan and we revisit that plan basically weekly, pretty much weekly, to see, are we on track? Do we need to change paths? How can we give you more support in this area if you're having trouble moving forward, et cetera. As I mentioned, it's a 22-month-long development period that culminates in a Queer Public Festival where the works are co-presented alongside of each other. It's really important that, to me, that people see this work in rep and see how they influence each other and build off of each other. We go to Double Edge for 3 week-long production intensives, which includes bringing all 3 resident artists and their companies to Double Edge Theater for a week. And we live and we work and we eat all with the Double Edge crew and within their facilities. And do you want to talk a little bit more about that specifically?
Yeah, I also want to mention that we are working with the artists, not just TTO, although I think TTO takes the lead on really holding the artists throughout the off period. Mm-hmm. But for instance, Double Edge offers a lot of support in terms of especially for, I would say, L1 and 2, mm-hmm. of you want to build a set. How long in advance do you have to think about a set to build a set? Mm-hmm. Really the idea was you might not know what it takes to create a performance. What can we offer in terms of expertise? We have someone who's in this residency, the current one is going to be building a giant machine, which is, they really want it to be of metal. So they're gonna be coming to Double Edge to be working with our crew to learn how to do metalworking for a week or for 5 days before the residency starts. The idea is there's something also to be offered about mentorship that's also not monetary, that's really useful for a lot of these artists. when people come to Double Edge, I think that they're entering into a community of artists that are living and practicing year round, which I think is really important centering. They're also working with like a team of professionals who are either really good at looking at, like, let's say I have a piece that I want and I want advice about the next step. We have people who are really invested in making sure that these artists feel like they can talk to an outside person. Also, when they come, there's other people who are related to Double Edge but maybe not part, who they can connect with over dinners, which is really important. The idea is that this is a space for play while also being a container in some sort of way. Yeah, I think that is maybe, do you want me to mention anything else, or?
No, I think that really covers it. We'll emphasize this a little bit too, but really you all help us in ways that we are not entirely equipped when it comes to foresight with production. You all do so much that is experimental, and when it comes to touring, that's a big thing that we're thinking about together, because really it is kind of a transfer project between Double Edge to Boston and then ideally wherever they go next. And so there's also long-term commitment that you all put in as well when it comes to making sure that the work that we're creating with these artists is also sustainable outside of just this residency. Some other quick things that I'll mention are we support the lead artists, the 3 lead artists, financially over the 2 years with a stipend, and then also each time we kind of gather, them and all of their company are also paid out, and that helps support not only these 3 resident artists, but also a community of around 30 artists at least twice a year, which is really big for us. We include travel for folks who are unable to get to Double Edge by themselves, which is pretty much everyone. Housing at Double Edge Theater in conjunction with partners that you all have local to Ashfield, and as well as your own housing. And Double Edge provides meals for us, which is huge, as you were talking about when it comes to like, what is the freedom that's offered when you don't have to think about where your next meal is coming from? It's a huge act of care and something that also allows us to connect with each other in a very human way multiple times a day, and also connect with Double Edge community and the artists who are often there visiting you outside of our residency. They also have access to Double Edge facility and staff support, as you were just talking about, when it comes to Double Edge's workshop, costumes, things that we're able to use their facilities, and also get mentorship and support on some of those buildings. And I think that's all I have to mention about what we offer, even though there's so much more marketing.
Marketing, grants,
Yeah.
A lot more.
A lot more.
I do want to say, I think that the most important thing to say about this is that this is led by queer people and queer art, and it's really important to understand that framing, which is not usual in terms of these long-term process. And it's really also important that it's not led by an educational institution. This isn't something that we're like studying. We're doing it. We're here for those artists.
Yeah.
It's not like there's no case study about this. This was like just something that we decided needed to happen, and we make it happen. And I think that when I think about this is one of the projects that gives me the most passion about the world right now, because the idea is at the end of this process for a lot of these artists, they're coming out with something that they have ownership of, that they've been really doing for the last 2 years, that we help support, but it's theirs. And that's really, really important for me, and I think for TTO and for you, Des.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that the poet earlier talked about burnout, and we receive our artists consistently at a peak of burnout. This is when they are burnt out of the cycle of having to work to make art, not make art to live. And consistently, we've welcomed people into the residency who are like, I don't know how to move forward on leadership in a way that feels decolonized, in a way that doesn't feel like the way I've seen white institutional leaders lead groups of people, or directors that I've worked with lead groups of people. So we also offer them leadership advice, and we have mentors who help with that as well. Because collective leadership in the ways that our our resident artists and also how our organizations work is really difficult. It's really difficult to be in a position where you are the leader of something and also taking in everyone's advice. And so a lot of our conversations are also about how to support the artists in ways that really allow them to be their own kind of sovereign artists and have their own ways of, their own aesthetic, their own ways of making art, their own leadership style. So when you talk about ownership, I'm also thinking about like really owning your creative practice and that being a big outcome for us as well.
I think we can go to the next slide. I think that we want to talk about some highlights, and then we're going to talk about some trouble spots, and then we'll have a little bit, hopefully, of time for some section for some questions. Rural spaces, in my opinion, are kind of awesome and kind of terrible, like most spaces. But the nice thing about bringing queer folks of color to Double Edge is to see them do whatever the fuck they want. Yeah. Like, it's really, you have freedom in a way when you're on a place where you have privacy to really explore in a way that you don't in, I think, a lot of urban spaces where you have people around you all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's one of my highlights, is like seeing people going in the stream mm-hmm. every time there's somebody in the water mm-hmm. and just like being like, I want to be in the water today, and just going. Or someone being like, I want to have a campfire. Like, I want to be able to sit by a campfire. And like having that ability is a highlight for me. That, I mean, not for me, but for life. Yeah. Like that's the joy, is that people get to do what the fuck that they want without it being required or like, you know, managed. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I feel the happiest at Double Edge when I see people wander off into the woods somewhere, and I say, they'll be back eventually, whatever.
we say, look out for the bears, please.
Yeah, I say, please do a tick check.
Yeah.
But the amount of freedom that's given not only to make work, but to also just experience the beauties of life is extremely important. And while it may seem like something that feels frivolous, that's because we live in urban communities where that is such a privilege. It's such a privilege to be able to turn off the parts of your brain that are geared towards fitting a particular script or working in a particular way. And Double Edge really allows us to kind of surrender to creative spirit in a way that's very important.
Yeah. I think a highlight also, I have two, but I mean a big highlight for me is that we've had so much time to make mistakes. Yeah. And really been lucky to be in partnership with each other where we get to make mistakes and we get to talk about it and then we get to do better. Mm-hmm. I think the first residency, we made a lot of mistakes. I think I made a lot of mistakes. But luckily, Des was there to be like, we debrief all the time, daily, at the end of residency, before residency, but the idea of having someone stay in the room with you and be like, actually, this idea is really worth all the problems that it comes with, because it does, like, then that, I think, is a highlight of this kind of partnership, also a highlight of not having to have a product.
Yeah, it's not once we do this thing, it's over. Which I think is really important. We're doing this in order to sustain a partnership and an idea, and this is helping to serve that. Yeah, and I just really appreciate so much of how we're able to learn from each other.
Yeah. I would say another thing, we talked a little bit about how this extends our capacity as organizations, and that's true. I want to say also that this concept couldn't exist in another way because we need to work together, which is that Double Edge, I would say the only thing that we're really specialists in is being rural. Otherwise, we just do a lot of stuff. I don't know if we're necessarily specialists in it, but we just do it. So like, we're not specialists in housing, but suddenly we have people who live with us year round and we house them. We're not really specialists in environmental justice work, but we somehow end up doing environmental justice work because that's where we are called, whether that's members of our community or not. I would say that as a queer person, I really do focus on presenting queer work. That is a passion of mine. But I don't think that I would have done this residency. I don't think I would have been called to do this, nor had the ability to do this without you. And I think that TTO's situationality in Boston, in urban space, really as an artist yourself, because you do your own performance work, really knowing community that could use this is so vital. It's just an anecdote is that one of the things we learned in the residency was like, it was so much better for us to have people who brought their people than it was to audition people to find for them, because they are able to have those relationships pre-built. I think that we realize that too with each other. It's like, if I'm trying to go and look for people to do this thing outside of my community, I'm not gonna do it well. And it's not gonna go as well as if I partner with somebody deeply who I trust, who is like, I know the people. I know the people who need this. I know what communities to talk to. And I think that that is one of the biggest highlights of this. I don't think I would have been connected to half the people that we've met.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And I don't think half the people that we connect with would have connected with each other.
Yeah.
I think part of it is finding the holes of where we like need this type of person to be part of this, and they need us. And sometimes those are people who are kind of new to our community or know a friend of a friend. But those instances have created some of the most sustained like artistic partnerships that we have continued with TTO as well, in terms of like, okay, you did this residency and you were new. Now you're doing the full residency, not just as a director on one project, but as the resident artist. And those are the kind of facilitations of relationships that we're really excited about as well.
Also, I think it extends outside of this program.
Absolutely.
Like, we have one of the resident artists is performing in Double Edge's summer performance. Another one just was in our intensive program. Like, there's the symbiosis of it. And I know, like, one of the TTO people is messaging on the side with one of our production managers asking advice about production things. Like, the idea is that we are able to connect, that this residency is actually incubating relationships that extend outside of this, which is really important. And I want to say, from my positionality, is like, you know, Double Edge is primarily a white organization. And I do think that there's a lot of reticence when you're bringing a lot of folks of color, for very good reasons, coming out to a rural place with a bunch of white people. I understand that. But the relationship that Des and I have, and the relationship that TTO and Double Edge has, we're a mirror of a larger relationality between these two organizations, actually allows for trust built in a really different way. So it sort of plants the seed when you see people in leadership able to have this kind of relationship. And then over the period of 22 months, you get to build on that. Trust moves at the speed of time and ability. I'm saying the quote wrong. But the idea is that because we're all together in the room for that long, the relationship that they have is different, and then the next iteration of this residency is different because of that. I think we had some bullets, but do we want to? We have well, no. Yeah, I think that is.
Yeah, I think that does really capture everything. But I want to hit specifically on what you're talking about when it comes to expanded resources and capacity, because it. We'll say this on the next one, that money is finite, time is finite, space is finite, but we really wouldn't be able to do this partnership without the co-collaboration on grants, the ability that you all have space that just does not exist in Boston and would cost us 1 million times more to be able to be at for as often as we are working, and specifically space that we're also able to curate what the space feels like. We're able to curate how we set up the space before we invite artists in as well. I think those are things that are so much easier or so much more fruitful to invest in at Double Edge than it possibly could be in Boston. And in terms of capacity, we are a really small team. There are 4 people in our programs department, 3 of whom are full-time, who make this residency happen. And to be able to also be held cross-organizationally with you, your production manager, your, I actually don't know what, neither here, titles are always shifting here, but to be also held and supported and learn from your staff is really huge too. We wouldn't be able to do it without that kind of support.
And just to be clear, because I don't think we mentioned it, we're talking about sometimes up to 30 people coming for a week. That kind of space, and we provide, I would say, at least half of the housing. Bare minimum. So we're doing half the housing, all the food, 30 people for a week, residency support for 30, pickups, departures. that, and I think that we've been adjusting internally what that actually takes, but that kind of support just isn't available in the city long-term like that in a non-exorbitant way. Or if there is, maybe we just don't know about it. Let's move to the next slide, I think, because we have 15 minutes left. We can maybe spend 10 on this next slide. I just want to talk for a second about roadblocks. Being queer right now and being a person of color is not safe. I would also say that TTO is engaged in a really public fight right now against this administration. I think the roadblock definitely doesn't come from our partnership, but it's something that we acknowledge. How do you bring people in a way that sort of cultivates a sense of ability to do your own work? And how do you actually acknowledge the world around you? Because we can talk about the space at Double Edge, but there's a town right next to us that we don't know everybody who lives there. We can't talk through all that with everyone. And we've definitely had moments in the town where we've had to work through things. And so the idea also is that Double Edge as a community partner is committed to working through things with the town and not just with our community is really important, and also that we're really preparing artists for when they come to a rural space. You can't just say, you should come and hang out, and then don't say anything else, and then suddenly like someone says, oh, the nearest airport is an hour and 15 minutes away. How do I get to you? Where do I go if there's a hospitalization need? How do I talk about my pronouns or my medical allergies if the police come up because someone called the police? Like, or that's not the right example, but like if I have to go to the hospital, or like, how do I deal with the police? We have to center that before people step foot, and I would say even before people think about coming into our property. And that is a responsibility and has been a roadblock, and it's something that we're constantly working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And just what it means to what you were talking about when it comes to the trust in us as leaders, therefore extending the trust of an organization. It's also how do you foster trust with the 30 QT BIPOC folks that we're bringing into this organization in order for them to feel held and comfortable. And I think a lot of that is also reflected in our team and the preparatory work that we do before you even get here. The artists are with us for I think like 6 to 9 months before we ever go to Double Edge, outside of an orientation, and therefore are able to have conversations with you all before we even come. It's not you drop in and you just met 30 new people for the first time, and I think that is really helpful. I want to talk a little bit about the rural to urban kind of production logistics, because I think that is one of the biggest roadblocks that we've had just when it comes to the productions in general, is that there is a lot that's amazing about Double Edge in terms of imagination, and the technical capacities are much different than those in urban theaters. So oftentimes this means that we have artists who want to experiment with projections or want to experiment with really intense lights, and we say, we can't do that Double Edge. We need to have a plan for how you might scale up to that once we get to wherever we're going. This upcoming festival is going to be at the Modern at Suffolk, so that's a lie. It's going to be at the Roberts Theater at the Calderwood. And so really having to be, I kept saying this in April, which is that I feel like we have to be time travelers who report back from the future, like this is going to be a problem later if you move through or build to this scale now and want to transfer it, and or don't wait to start a process in even its most experimental form until you have all of the possible tech equipment you can have. It's important to even just test an idea at Double Edge, and a lot of the residency is about what can we do to first experiment and then expand. But there are also some things like last year we had a rigging system that was very easily put up in Double Edge's barn that has the huge wooden beams, and really difficult to put in any black box theater that does not have that. And so again, those kind of logistical plannings of being able to see, okay, in 2 years, this is where we want to be. With that in mind, what can we do so that we don't kind of get midway through and say, oh, we've built something that actually can't move from Double Edge. because we really are planning touring when it comes to these projects.
Yeah, the current project tried to steal one of our old, like, dilapidated, broken, it's a
Piano?
piano harp, so like a giant, like, I think it's like maybe 150-pound piano harp, which is like 6.5 feet tall or something. And they were like, we want to hang it in your barn. And I think Des was like, no.
It took like 6 people to move it difficultly.
I do think that like the space at Double Edge is really an invitation to play, and the idea of like, okay, at some point we're gonna have to massage this into something else that will go to other spaces and also be accessible for you to bring to other spaces is hard. It's not that fun. Like there is a point where you have to be like, actually we need to dial down a little bit, and that can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, I also just wanted to acknowledge that the financial capacity that the 2 of our organizations have in order to support larger companies is not always what other organizations can support if these artists are going to tour particular work. And I think that is really something that we're learning right now, is how big can these companies be in order for them to actually reach their goal after this project, when not every opportunity is going to be as well supported as ours is.
We're definitely balancing the line between this is radical, and I believe this truly is radical, but like this is radical and we want to give you all the space to experiment in your dreams because you might not get this anywhere else. And how do we actually set you up for success in a non-patronizing way that I think I just said, but like how do we set you up with the tools so that after you finish this residency, you can really fly with this? And it's hard. It's a line. It's not easy, and I think it's really important. I also want to just echo off of what you just said. Time and money and capacity is real. We have to say no to some things. That's not. I don't know if that's. I think no can be a love word. I think that the reality is that keeping this residency going is a fight. It's not like it's an active choice that we make all the time. Like, I think it would be much easier to be like, actually, no. Right now, we don't have the capacity. It wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be what we want, but that is definitely an easier choice. Our organizations and us, too, are saying, like, no, we're fighting for this. But it is a realistic thing for us to say, like, you're bringing 30 people, that's a lot of work, and in the face of all the other things that we're doing. And I don't want to say that that's not a realistic thing.
It's really realistic, and I think something that we talk about organizationally is what are other programming that can help support the funding of this programming, and what are we doing strategically across our organization to protect and support this, which is much more experimental and not always something that you're going to get your money back on. I don't know, that's a hard thing to care about as artists. But in order to support it, we are also looking at other ways that funding can come in. Yeah, I think it's helpful for us to go to Q&A now. Does anyone have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions? We just have 5 minutes left, so I know that if anyone does, if not, go for it. We have a mic coming at you.
Thank you. I'm really curious about, I know earlier you were talking about how you guys navigate conflict within the different organizations, and that you guys kind of have like inter-organizational process that you're able to move through with each other. I'm just more curious about like what that looks like, and you know, because I definitely have like seen how conflict can like break organizations and relationships and people apart, and it's like, what is a different option that feels more communal, you know?
Do you want me to talk about that?
Yeah, sure.
I think it's really important also, thank you for saying that, we have our internal conflict mechanisms, both of our organizations, which are very distinct. I think one of the main things that I think Des and I try to do when we're working also is we really separate the personal from the work. Like for me, it's like text is personal, Slack is work, and everything has to be separate. So we allow each other to be like grumpy in one way, and it's like, this does not affect the personal. That's a really important line to hold, because otherwise this work is personal. Like it means something. So it can really quickly get to that tense place. What I think the double-edged way has generally been, depending on the type of conflict, which is usually either, depending on the type of conflict in the space of this residency, is sometimes it's an internal to the residency conflict, in which case TTO usually takes lead on that, because I'm thinking of one where we had one member of a previous cohort who needed some help in the face of the rest of the cohort, and I think you were doing a lot of internal mediation between that. I think in terms of other like inter-conflict, what we've generally had is a leadership meeting first where we talk about what we understand has happened, and then we, depending on that, we come out with different scenarios, one of them being like a conversation between people where we sort of figure it out. I think the most recent conflict was just one that I can think of as an accessibility one, where there were different understandings of what COVID agreements were when the residency started. That was brought up by a resident artist, and the way that we dealt with it was we had a private leadership meeting after that where we decided what to do and how to deal with it. I think we had several of those over the next few days.
Yeah, we had several. It had come up at our orientation, and then we had a kind of private meeting in our production meeting about it together to decide as resident artists and then also leads of the organizations what was possible. And then they had separate meetings with their companies to determine if there were internal goals around COVID safety that they could implement for themselves, such as they all mask in the room versus another group that might not all mask in the room. So those are, I hope that's a good example of like how we kind of deal with that.
I think the answer is we all stay in the room.
Yeah.
That's the big answer, is like you stay in the room, because the moment you leave, you don't provide the opportunity for any sort of resolution, which sometimes you can't. Like sometimes people do have to leave the room, and we understand that, but if you're closing the door on continuing, then that's sort of the end. So we're really committed to like working things to a path towards something next. It's like sort of just shutting it down as the end for us.
And that doesn't mean don't take the pause, right? There was, I think, I don't remember what it was, but there was a moment in our recent residency where I think you tried to solve a conflict with me, and I was like, we actually have to wait and see how the rest of this goes until we can do the problem solving that we're talking about. And so also I think leaving space for not right now, but not never is really important. Because sometimes it's hard to work through conflict when you're like activated or just landed on a farm with 30 people and no one knows where they're going. Not always the best time to problem solve, but it's really, there's a lot of safety and trust in knowing that the problem isn't going to go away, and that the reality of being able to sustain the partnership in ways that feel aligned with our values and the way we want to build community and the way we want to work together as friends requires that you stay in the conversation and you stay in the room, and no one kind of like just automatically gets left behind.
That might have been our cue.
Feel free to, I'm gonna stick around for a couple more minutes during this in-between if you wanna come up and chat. I don't wanna offer that for you, but
I'll be around
Great.
until the end of the day, so if you wanna find me, I wanna say that I hope that this inspired you to do something like this, or like to find ways. I don't think it's immediately replicable, but I really hope that like this is an inspiring way to work for many people, because I really want to see more work like this. We would love to see that.
yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.